Harley Race is our next induction, and please welcome for the induction, WWE Hall of Famer, Tito Santana.
Well, I believe that I'm going to be bringing up Chris up here after I talk. They asked me to say a few things about Harley Race, and may he rest in peace. Harley Race is well known in our business to have been one of the toughest guys in professional wrestling. He had a punch. If you were in a bar and you messed with Harley Race, you were going to be knocked out, guaranteed. So don't mess with Harley Race. In 1978, I bought a 1988, I bought a 1988 Bonneville. I was in Amarillo, Texas, and I had Harley Race, Andre the Giant, and Mario, and myself in my car, and Harley says, I want to drive. And we had a 350 mile trip, and I didn't know if I was going to survive because the needle was buried all the way down, and I was scared shitless, to be honest with you. I couldn't wait for the trip to be over, but we made it. And I was talking to, Harley Race was a character. I mean, he could put the beer away too. He could keep up with Andre the Giant, probably as good as anybody else could. And, he'd step into the ring, and he was probably the best conditioned athlete in the world, because I don't know of anybody else who had more 1 hour, 60-minute draws than Harley Race. And he could keep up with you whether you were 20 years younger, 30 years younger. He'd wear your butt out in that ring. He was the man. He was a great champion. And I was in a battle royal with Harley Race, I think maybe in St. Louis. And he grabs me and he says, come here, kid. You're gonna learn how to throw a punch tonight. And I was just real green. I hadn't learned how to throw a good punch. I was afraid because people don't know that wrestlers are pretty tough guys. And I get in the ring, I get in the dressing room, I weigh 240 pounds, and I was a little guy in the locker room, and I sit in the corner. I didn't want to bother anybody because, I was scared to death. But he tells me, I'm gonna teach you how to throw a punch, and he grabs me and he backs himself up into the corner. We hooked up, and he says, okay, throw a punch right here. And I throw a punch, and I was afraid to, what we call potato him, because I was afraid what he'd do to me. So I didn't throw a very good punch, and he says to me, lay it in, you pussy. I'll never forget that. So the next one, I probably laid it in pretty good, but it didn't hurt. He had a hard head. You couldn't hurt Harley Race. But that night, I learned how to throw a punch, because throwing a punch, I believe, was just losing the fear of potatoing somebody. Not being afraid to hurt somebody. And, I got pretty good at throwing punches. I could throw a punch right to the nose, right to the teeth with my right and my left hand. Yeah, but you never complained. Anyway, Harley Race to me is somebody that was admired by every professional wrestler that ever laced their boots, and I'm proud to be one of his friends. And I just met his son, And I didn't meet his wife, but I saw her sitting there. I want to bring you guys up here and talk about something that's very special for you guys. Harley Race.
Tito, would you please present the Hall of Fame ring?
Brought a couple of notes because otherwise I'll start telling Harley stories and we'll be here like Tony will be here till 3 o'clock in the morning. You know where that came from? That it was the, he was the heel, of course, the big heel. And he used to do that to piss off the first 3 rows of the fans. Because back then, you didn't have a border around or block or anything. It was ring concrete fans. And he, and it was to piss people off. It was like, God, Dad, you can't make anybody hate you more? I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. I'm humbled. Well, as my dad would say, get your ass up there and tell these people you're thankful. I want to start by thanking the International Wrestling and Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Seth and all of your volunteers. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the NWA and the WWE and all the men that believed in my father when he was young. And I specifically say Gus Harris. I don't know if anyone in this room knows who Gus was, but he was a promoter in St. Joe, Missouri at the time, and he was the one responsible for my father had the car wreck, and they were going to take his leg. And Gus said, no, we're not taking his leg. And the moral of the story is my dad. Oh, sorry. Anybody heard any of that? Well, I'm used to having that. No, I don't want to get Tony going.
That's just wrestling.
No, seriously though, and I want to thank all the guys. Over 40 years in the business that my father worked with. I mean, Rick, Terry, Dory, Jerry, Jack, Gordon, Greg, Tito, Tony. Are you guys out there? You look a little different. The Hart family, especially Stu and Brett. Larry Henning, my father's Kurt and I used to play together when we were kids. Dusty, Bubba, the Grahams, all the Von Erks. I mean, there's way too many to try to pin down all right now. But I want to thank all of them. I also want to thank all the promoters. Whether it's Fritz, Von Erk, or Sam Mushnick, Giant Bubba, Ron Miller in Australia. Of course, Jim Crockett and Jim Barnett. My dad, he used to call my dad, my boy. My boy needs his first class. I want to also thank my mother. All you guys that are smart know that behind every good man is a good woman. And of course, I want to thank my father, the greatest wrestler on God's green earth, the greatest loving dad on God's green earth, my friend, my buddy, and whom we honor tonight. I have the honor to be here solely because of my father. And finally, and most important, I want to thank the tens, hundreds of thousands of millions of fans out there. Dad always told us the most important people in our family are the fans. When I was brought up, I was, told that, I was taught that. That's the most important people you ever had. And Dad and I and Mom would go out to dinner, or, whatever, just some social setting. And they'd come up and ask for autographs, and my mom would say something, why can't they wait till we're finished with dinner or whatever. My dad would say, Yvonne, that person is paying for this meal. That person paid for the vacation you went on. That person is paying for Justin's college. If it wasn't for those people that came to the ring, or came to the arena and watched me wrestle, we'd live in a tent. And he'd go on, you're always nice to these people. You don't worry about when they're asking for autographs. You worry about when they stop asking for autographs. And so I grew up with an immense appreciation for those who paid to watch my dad do what he loved. I got a little older, and Dad taught me a very important lesson. He said, give them their 5 minutes. He said, some people are going to recognize you, recognize your name, my name, whatever. But unless you're on the way to the emergency room or late for work, you give them their 5 minutes. You let them tell their stories. You let them reminisce. You let them give their opinions. And answer the questions. Tell them a story. Entertain them for a bit. Because you know what, son? That 5 minutes is something, 5 minutes that they'll never, ever, ever forget in their life.
Amen.
And starting to feel like Billy Graham. I got a little older, and I realized what an honor it was. I've met CEOs and, whatever, large companies and celebrities and whatever, and even some high-level politicians, unfortunately. And I get to see them melt in front of me just for a moment. I used to watch your dad with my dad and my grandpa when I was 5 years old. Every morning, every Saturday, and I see these guys get $10,000 suits, and they get to melt just in front of me for a moment. And if that isn't an honor, then there isn't an honor. Their voice would even change. They get to, hi, Mitch, my son. And they're like, wow. It's a testament to who my dad was and how many of those he affected all over the world to this day. And it's a testament to my mother and father. They brought me up to interact with wrestling fans, all people inside and outside the business, with the utmost respect. And I say to all of you again, all you wrestling fans out there, I thank you. That's how my dad looked at it and how he taught me to look at life. So I realized as time went on how unique a childhood I had. I was blessed to grow up like I did. I was in 12 countries before I was 10 years old.
Wow.
My parents had cars and boats and homes and only, things that all their families would only dream of. I grew up wanting for nothing. I also realized that with that honor came some consequences. Excuse me. You all know my dad was the king. My dad was the king. Except in Kansas City, where he would cheer every once in a while. So he was always hated everywhere he went. And, you know, a 6, 7, 8-year-old, that's a little bit to handle. Why did they hate him so much? But as I grew up, I realized that, wow, the booing and the chant, calling him names and this and that, yet the arena and the stadium was always full. And I watched my parents be very happy that the arena was full. And I thought, you know what? The people love to hate my dad, but they pay money to hate my dad. Okay, I guess that'll work. You know, that hatred though rubbed out on me. When I used to wrestle when I was a little kid, I started when I was 7 years old. And you remember the kids wrestling, you know, in the high school gymnasium where there's like 8 matches going on over there. And every time I wrestled, the entire gymnasium, the parents and whatever, would focus on my match. And they'd sit there and chant for the other kid. They didn't care who it was. Just they wanted him to beat Harley's kid. And they're chanting and jeering and cussing at me. And I'm like, can you imagine that? Cussing at an 8-year-old because of his father? And I'd say, Dad, why are they yelling at me? He'd say, oh, it's about me. Don't worry about it. Just go out there and kick his ass. All right, so I did. You know, one of the other consequences of being Handsome Harley Race's son was when we traveled, and we traveled often with my father, my parents tried to kind of figure out which matches I should go to and which I shouldn't go to. You know, they had this little thing, is this going to be a wrestling match or is this going to be a blood match? And obviously if Dad was wrestling with Brody or the Butcher or Sheep, Mom and I were going to the movies that night, or putt or something. But if he was wrestling, you know, Jerry or Dory or any of the unknown and vast many wrestlers that were technical experts, we'd go. But as many of you all know out there, bless you, as many of you out there know that matches get out of hand. And the belts and the foreign objects and God only knows what would start going and the blood would start flying. Mom had to take me out. I had to get to the arena because I was screaming and crying and yelling. I said, he's killing my father, he's killing my father. And my mom's like, well, not really. Come on, let's get out. And so as I got older, people would ask me, did you ever have any tragic events happen when you were a child? I was like, well, besides watching my dad get the shit kicked out of him, might have been in a car wreck. For nearly a decade, from the mid-70s to the mid-80s, Dad wrestled 300 plus days a year, usually always at Broadway, almost. He spent an additional 2 to 3 weeks traveling. Every territory on Earth, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, South Pacific with Peter Maria. All over, of course, the U.S., Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean. He defended the title more times than anyone else ever had. On every continent, except Antarctica. And penguins don't wrestle. But my dad asked. the schedule that got him that was one of his schedule was one of the things that got him the tough guy name. Being a legitimate tough guy was that type of schedule. But most of his reputation as a tough guy came in the ring. All my life, I've listened to all the guys tell me how doggone tough he was in the ring. In fact, in 2007, when Dusty Rhodes was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, he singled out a couple of guys and he said, and I can't do Dusty's, I can't do it. But he said, Harley, stand up. And Dad stood up. He said, that's the toughest man I ever stepped in the ring with. And the whole crowd standing ovation for him. That was a really cool moment. You know, one of the most important things in wrestling is trust, integrity, and respect. Dad's name is synonymous with all those words. He was trusted, he was respected, and he had integrity in the ring and outside. One of the ways he showed this, when he was technically off, like from his NWA champion, from Jim Barnett's schedule, he'd come home and we'd get calls from here and there and whatever. So Mom and I and Dad would load up the van and we'd go to every one-horse town in Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas and Missouri and Oklahoma and Arkansas. If it was within 6-7 hour drive, Dad had to go. And he just finished wrestling in front of 40,000 people. Well, now we're in a town of 400 people. And he's wrestling in a high school gymnasium. 399 people were there. The other guy was the one he was wrestling. And he would let that young kid beat the hell out of him for 58 minutes. And you know, you guys all know, Dad can make a broomstick look like a good wrestler. And you know, at the end of the match, he'd come back and get disqualified or he'd win or whatever. And the moral was, though, that he believed everyone deserved to see the world champion. Not just those people in the big cities or whatever. This is back before cable and pay-per-view and whatnot, and videotape. And Dad believed that wrestling belonged to the people. And that's why he went to 400 plus or 400 minus towns with us. And I got a great tour of Nowheresville all over the place, but that was just how he was. There are many reasons that Dad was the toughest enter, as he called it, a squared circle. As I said, Dad was the NWA champion for a decade. Much of the reason was because of the promoters and the president at the time, Sam Mustaine. Sam was a wonderful man. They understood at that time that they can't work a man that hard and keep him away from his family and him to last. A lot of guys gave up the title solely because of the trauma. They also knew that with my dad as the champion, the results they wanted were the results they got in a match. If someone tried to shoot on Dad, the only thing that happened was that shooter got hurt. So that wasn't wise. Dad was the ring general. In fact, he told me once, he said, when something isn't going right in the ring, or didn't go all the way I wanted, I put him in our bar or headlock. And I leaned down right at their ear, and I said, don't piss me off. And they didn't. Even Andre. And and I would get people asking me all over social media, whatever, I get asked all the time, was Andre scared of your father in Haku? And I said, no, he wasn't scared, it was, respect. But Andre listened to the boss. In fact, the first time in 1978, I believe it was in Houston, Dad had Andre over his head. And Andre said, boss, put me down. Boss, put me down. My dad said, shut up, you big son of a bitch. Someone's got to take a picture of this. So, as tough as he was that immensely strong. In fact, when he had the big boys up in the air, if you watch the slow-mo, or if you really watch how he brings them down as gently as he can, because he didn't want to hurt him. And Andre, you're talking about 500, 550 pounds, depending on if he just ate or not. And he'd bring Andre down, and he'd just kind of set him down. I mean, it still looked like a slam, but he set him down for respect. Now imagine the strength it takes to not only put a guy that's 550 pounds over your head, but to control the fall. That's a strong dude. We went travel with my mom and dad, all the Hogan and Savage and all the guys that they'd hit the gym and Tony. And Dad, we'd go sightseeing. Dad would take us around the town, we'd look at any historical whatever, this and that. What my dad loved reading historical stuff. And then that night, Dad would body slam Andre, and none of the other guys could figure out how the hell he did it. He was just a brutally tough and naturally strong farm boy. And Dad was pretty much impossible to beat if you didn't want him. The toughness and the brutal schedule and travel extended into our family. I remember counting the seconds going to the airport to pick Dad up. I knew how many seconds it was from our house to the airport. And I also remember crying all the way there and all the way back. And Dad had to leave again. That was tough. Sorry. But as I got a little bit older, and they obviously didn't take me traveling with them when I was a baby, that was a hassle. I'd start traveling with them. My mom and I would start traveling with them. And the promoters at the time, whether it was Sam or Bubba or Ron Miller in Australia, would pay for my mom and I to travel with him. Because they knew that, you can't put a guy through that kind of schedule and expect him to last, or his family to last, or whatever. They figured out that to stay together, they had to travel together. So I get calls all the time, people, or whatever, social media stuff. And, what was it like to grow up with a dad that was never there? Some of them were kind of angry. And I said, no. I spent a lot of time with my dad. My mom and I spent a lot of time with my dad. It just wasn't at home. It was in museums, parks, arenas, stadiums, where we spent a lot of time together. They used to take me out of school for long periods of time to go traveling. I remember one distinct time when they went to my teacher and said, we'd like to take Justin out of school for a month to go to Japan. And the teacher's like, go ahead, he's going to learn more there than he's here. And so my mom would go over the lesson plans with me, and my mom was my tutor on the road. We'd have school time every day. For an hour or two. But if there was ever a Parents Hall of Fame, my mom and dad will be the first inductees. Now, in recent years, Dad's popularity has increased tenfold. One of the reasons that I kind of got back associated with the business over and above his wrestling school was this immense notoriety. And I'm talking to 25-year-old kids, and your dad's my favorite wrestler, and I'm saying you weren't even born when he retired. And how's that possible? And they say, you too. So I started looking around a little bit, and I was like, good God, I haven't even seen these matches. But those kids sparked an interest in my art. And even the older guys that, oh, now I can watch your dad again, I don't have to watch what goes on up in New York. And I started thinking, you know what? My father deserves a legacy. And I want to keep that going. So I devoted myself, and I have devoted myself and my time to keeping my dad's legacy alive. They all called my dad the boss, Mr. Race, or King. The only people that ever called him Harley were my friends, because he was just the guy that cooked them with my mom chocolate chip pancakes in the morning after a sleepover. With that being said, though, my mom and I grew up to write books. Oh, first thing. My mom's book is called Life with a King. It's a memoir like her life with my father, and the ins and outs and the trials and tribulations of a very awkward, very challenging marriage. And I kind of chose a different path in my book. My book is called Don't Tell Your Mother. And I still tell stories on podcasts and whatnot. And my mom will call me, you guys did what? I'm 54 years old now. You didn't know that? He said, don't tell him. I guess I never told him. One night, Dad had, in the 70s, Dad had a Jeep Wagoneer. Some of the folks out there remember there was inside the Jeep Wagoneer, there was a dial. And it was green normal and red emergency. When you turned it on emergency, that thing was like a tank, all four-wheel pulled together. Well, Rick loved it, Flair loved it, and he talked my dad into selling it to him. So Dad sold it to him, Dad bought a new one. So we're somewhere in North Carolina, out of Flair country, and we're leaving the arena that night, and Rick pulls out first, Dad and I pull out behind him. Rick stops at a stoplight, and Dad stops, and he looks over at me, and he gives me that grin, like, something's gonna go down. And I was like, and I was 6, 7, 8 years old. I'm like, oh, cool, yeah, I would do whatever you want. So he reaches in, he turns that thing on emergency, rolls up, touches bumpers with Rick, and pushes it through the intersection. Now there's the tires squealing, everything going everywhere, and blue smoke. Rick's first action is, of course, to hit the brakes, which made it worse. And after he realized he wasn't stopping the nutcase behind him with the battering ram, he put on the gas, and it became not a tug of war, but a road race. Well, of course, the cops saw this. So he comes roaring up behind Dad and I, because we're going. And Dad's like, oh, shit. And so, of course, the bulls are still running. Dad gets out of the car, Rick gets out of the car, I get out of the car because I'm a nosy little kid that wants to know what's going on. And they walk up to the officers, or the officer, excuse me, and his eyes are like saucers. And his jaw drops to the ground, and he realizes who he's done. He grabbed that radio, and he put out a call for backup, APB, all the whatnot he could say into the radio. And Dad was like, oh shit, we're in trouble now. But he wasn't calling all the other officers to come and help assist in the arrest. He was calling them all for autographs. So Dad and Rick sit there and sign autographs on scrap of paper, even the back of traffic tickets. You know, they'd sign the autographs on the back of it, whatever. Anything that would withhold ink, they signed. And, you know, they all go off after a while. I mean, you know, you're talking about 10, 15 cop cars. It looked like a major accident scene. And so they start moving off, and Rick gets in the Jeep, and he pulls forward, and Dad, I get inside, and Dad looks over at me, don't tell your mother. And I never did. We were in Rome one time, in the Vatican, and Mom and Dad, we've been to many historical places and museums and whatnot. Mom and Dad have a different way of looking at things. Dad liked to read every plaque that he could find. And Mom liked to look at art and, statues and this and that. So we walk up to a place that's just to the right of the Sistine Chapel, and Dad says, come here. I said, what? Watch out for those goofy guards. Of course, it's posted all over the Vatican, strictly no photographs. So I'm watching the door, and Dad goes in and proceeds to take photos of all the stuff you're not to take photographs of. And the guard would come up, and Dad, you put that camera on me. He goes, nothing to see here. And the guard would leave, he'd go back. 36 pictures, the whole roll. Remember the 35 millimeter roll of film back then? Well, he took all of them. And, later that day, we went back to the hotel room because Dad wanted to develop the pictures of the stuff that he wasn't supposed to have pictures of. And he's sitting there rewinding, how you rewinded the film back into the little canister back then. And he rewinded, and he had this weird look on his face. And he rewound it until it stopped. He opened up the back of the camera. There was no film in there. So we didn't have pictures of the stuff we weren't supposed to have pictures of. God was intervening. I have hundreds that don't tell you other stories, but I want to kind of wrap this up. I do want to thank everyone again. I want to thank Seth. Thank you very much. It's quite an honor. I've seen Dad inducted into many Hall of Fames, but I never actually stood here for him. And it weighs heavy in my heart. I miss him every day. But, as Dad would say, I'll move.
Hey, thank you for the reception, for this wonderful welcome. I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about how I met Harley. Where there is a legend, there is a real life. I was a flight attendant. I had just flown back from a trip. When I arrived at my home, my two roommates were watching wrestling on television. And I said to them, what are you doing watching television with a wrestling match on? And they said, well, that guy was here today, was wrestling, he saw your picture, and he wanted to meet you. So I wasn't feeling good, and I slept most of the day, and he kept calling and calling. And finally he said, maybe you'd feel better if you go out with me and have a piece of blueberry pie and a cup of coffee. I thought how exciting that is. And we went and had a good time. And I just wasn't interested in him. When he got there that night, before he asked me to go out for blueberry pie and ice cream, I thought, when he came to the door, I thought, oh, look at this big guy with bleach blonde hair. And I just thought, he's fake. And little by little, things went on, and I went to, the next day we went snowmobiling, and we took my roommates with me. And Larry Henning brought a snowmobile over, world champion Larry Henning. And we went snowmobiling, and the next day the phone kept ringing again and again. And that's when tag team partner, world heavyweight champion Larry Henning was with us. And when he came home that night, he opened the door, walked me to my apartment, and he held his hand out for me to shake it. He said, "Good night." I thought, wow, that was it? He didn't want anything else, not even a kiss. So his next check. And then it kept going on, and I still didn't like him, but yet there was something that was drawing myself to him. And one night he came over with flowers and Girl Scout cookies. I slurred to myself, and I didn't know where he was going to be taking me this time. Surprise, surprise, where do you think that would be? Strip joint. I was very disappointed. Little did I know where we were going, but I would have known that I would have gone out with him again. And then the next day, I had to fly again. And when the flight attendants and the pilots spend a lot of time together for a month at a time, we get to get into the family problems and really, really get to know one another. And when I told him about Harley, I said, I think he's fake. I'm very confused. And so they said, well, give the poor guy a chance. So I did. So I just want to end by saying, where there is an image, there is a real life. I speak from my heart and truth, life with a king.